Sometimes life is messy. Have you ever wished you could refocus your mind, home, relationships, and work life? Join us as we use research-based information to make practical changes and simplify life. This is Life Simplified.
Welcome to Life Simplified. During April, we're going to be digging into all things gardening. So in today's episode, we're going to be looking at different types of gardening and how to get started. So I've collected some research from various different extension offices, and the sources are going to be linked in our show notes. But also keep in mind that your local extension office can provide you with a lot of things that we're going to be talking about today. So if you do have questions about your gardening, please feel free to reach out to your county extension office. So we're going to start off talking about different types of gardening. So do you all have a favorite type of garden?
The kind that someone else does for me.
Nice.
I don't have much of a green thumb.
And that's fine. When I'm referring to different types of gardening, I'll just go ahead and talk about it. And maybe you'll be like, oh, I've done that type of gardening before. So maybe I'll refresh your memory on something you've done in the past. So gardening can be more than just planting flowers. It can be different things that you create. It can be a theme garden. It could be just to attract birds or butterflies. It can be a pond, or it could be the traditional, maybe what your mind's going to, the herbs, the fruits, and the vegetables.
So I don't have a favorite, but we've done a couple different types. And I too do not have a green thumb, but I'm married to a farmer and my kids love it and I don't mind it. But we've done raised beds. That was a project we kind of tackled as a family during COVID. And then we've just done traditional garden in the backyard. Once we moved to a space that we had a little bit more room and we have a larger garden, but they both were like pretty nice, pretty successful, and the kids have enjoyed them.
And I did a raised bed garden. I taught a home ec lesson on gardening in small spaces a couple of years ago. So I did all the research and learned how to do the things. I'm not great at it, but I did a raised bed garden. And then sometimes we'll have flowers, and our youngest loves to look at all the pretty things. So that gives her some good responsibility to keep the plants watered and things like that. So we've done some flowers in containers.
For myself, I've had the container gardening and also far as a regular garden. Me in a regular garden didn't do too well because it's a lot. And when you're busy with family and everything else, it's real hard to, keep the weeds out or pick when you need to and everything. So I decided not to have anyone anymore because I didn't have time to take care of it. So
Exactly. And we'll be talking about that a little bit later on. If you don't have a lot of time, ways that you may be able to garden. So for me, you may not be able to tell, but so why I'm leading this is I'm the gardener. We have herbs, we have veggies, we have a raised bed. We've actually done just the traditional gardening. I have a little small pumpkin business. So we actually grow pumpkins and sell them in the fall, and flowers. I love all things flowers. So I've not, and like I talked about before, you can plant specific flowers to attract butterflies, and that's not an adventure I've done yet. I think I may want to do that. I do like flowers and having them bloom, with the different seasons and things like that, but just not specifically to attract that. And there's also some that you can do like hummingbirds. I know some people love hummingbirds. There's certain flowers that hummingbirds love. You could also do a composting or organic garden. And not a lot of people think about that. And we do have some resources at the extension office about composting and how to get started and how to do that. I also mentioned a backyard pond or water garden, and that could just be, something, whether it's just a water feature that you add, whether it's a fountain. Some people actually dig miniature ponds and put fish and flowers and different plants and stuff around them. So there's a lot of different ways that you can garden. And you all probably kind of realize that a lot of us live on farms, or we live a little bit where we can do these types of things, but we're going to jump into different ways that you can garden. So if you're thinking, this is not for me, I don't have space in my backyard to dig up half an acre, stay with us, because you'll be able to learn a little bit about different ways that you can garden. And so, as we've mentioned before, a lot of us have done traditional gardening. So that is, you plow the soil up and you get it prepared, and you plant your plants in there or your seeds. So either way you want to start that. And so with that, you want to think about what types of plants you're planting. If that is what you want to do, how much space you're going to need. If you're going to plant seeds, you want the soil to be really fine, and if you're just going to plant, the plants directly, it may not have to be as bad, but thinking about if where you put it at. So are the plants that you're going to plant need full sun? So I'm sure if you all bought flowers before, you've seen requires full sun or partial sun. So thinking about what you're planting and how much sun it's going to need. There are some disadvantages, though, with a traditional garden. Like Joni mentioned, it takes a lot of time. If you think about it, you're just, you're tilling up grass. So what's going to grow back? Grass. So if that is something that you're going to want to do, you're going to have extra time weeding out those extra grasses. Some people may lay plastic down over top of them. But something I would recommend if you do go the traditional gardening route is to do a soil sample. And so that is something that you can just get samples of your soil, just like it says, and collect them and take them to your extension office. And all of our extension offices in Kentucky have an ag and natural resource extension agent or a horticulture agent. They can send those soil samples off, and then they can give you a report to tell you if there's something else that your soil needs and how to improve the health of your soil to make sure that you're growing the best produce or whatever it is you're trying to grow possible. Next is raised beds. So we've all talked about that. I think during COVID, I think Tiffany mentioned, everybody was like, hey, let's grow something. Let's get outside and do some fun stuff. A raised bed is typically just how it sounds. It's just a bed that you build out of different boards, and you can build it as high as you want. Some people build them directly on the ground and just kind of stack boards up, or some people will elevate them. And that's really good if you have problems bending over, you have, back issues or knee issues, you can kind of put it to the height that you want it to be. And so with that, you have to fill the soil in. So kind of like the traditional one, you already have the soil provided. So it could be a little bit more expensive. So that is a disadvantage of the raised beds. But when you are making your raised beds, you want to think about when the size of it, are you going to be able to reach in the middle of it? I don't know if did you all do that when you all were building your raised beds? You wanted to make sure you were able to reach across it. You want it to be so big that you had to get inside of it to weed it or anything.
Yeah, we tried to do that. I don't know if we were successful, but definitely more of a rectangle shape, not a big square, because you don't want a center that you have to climb over things to get to. And ours were directly on the ground. We didn't build it up, which I think personally would have been a lot nicer, but would have taken a little bit more effort on our part.
Yeah, more supplies, right? Costly.
Mm-hmm. Did do a square, but it was a tiny square because I carted it from county to county demonstrating, and I joked at first that I like a garden that someone else takes care of, but I enjoyed learning about gardening, and I did plant something in my raised bed that season, and I enjoyed being able to have a small area. I think Joni mentioned earlier that it's just a lot, and I find it overwhelming if I think about it too much. So starting small, I think, would be something that would be really helpful for me.
As I was growing up, my parents had a huge garden, and my mom canned, preserved everything, froze. And as they have got older, they have transitioned to a raised bed themselves because it is so much easier for them to maintain. And, you can, and it's not as big. And they get as much, far as produce that they want. So, but they transitioned to the raised bed. So I've kind of helped them with that. But, just as they've got older, they cannot have the full big old garden that they used to.
Yeah, and they probably don't need as much now. So it's nice that they don't have to feel like they're trying to give it away or make sure they're not wasting it. Because that's how I feel sometimes with ours. We did have a larger one this last season. And same thing like what Joni said earlier, it was very successful. It produced a lot, but if you're not at home in that period of time, you miss out. And then I felt really guilty that we had all this good produce, but we kind of let it go too far. And a lot of it sometimes either went to waste or we didn't get to harvest it at the right timing. So size definitely can matter, because you want to have enough that you can feed your family, but you don't have so much that you're not able to utilize what you're growing.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And so thinking about, we talked about the size and what you can manage. A disadvantage of the raised bed garden is the cost. So we did mention it depends on what type of boards that you're going to use. You do have to add soil into it, whatever type of soil you add into it. But you can also, you're limited to what you can grow. So if you think about it, you can't plant corn in a raised bed garden, right? So if that's what you're wanting, you're obviously that's not the way to go. So just thinking about what you're wanting to plant and what's going to work best for you. And so the last one, which may fit all of us well, is a container garden. And so my parents have actually moved more towards container gardens. They use larger buckets, I guess you would say, but they plant tomatoes in them. And and you may know tomatoes kind of have a lot of roots and they need room to grow. But you can also use just a small flower pot or something on your windowsill. You can put herbs or whatever it is, peppers that doesn't take up a lot of space and grow in there. And one thing to keep in mind, whatever container that you're going to use for this, you want to make sure it has drainage holes. Because if you're going to water them and that water sits in there, that's going to hurt your plants. So I think maybe this may fit. And for me, thinking about, with my little one, we want to garden with him and he loves digging in the dirt and all the things, but we're also busy. And like we've mentioned before, I don't want to waste that. I used to be able to can and preserve, but I'm a little more limited on what I can do now. Of course, freezing is a good way. And I think we're going to talk about how you can preserve and utilize if you do grow vegetables in your garden on another episode. But just keeping in mind, containers may be just the way to go for you. And then so just a disadvantages for that is the cost, just the startup of whatever container you're going to purchase, the soil you're going to purchase. And then because there is drainage in those, you're going to have to water them more frequently. So I'm sure you all talked about having flowers during the summer. It's like you have to water them in the morning and at the night, right? And especially if they're in direct sunlight. So that is a little bit of setback if that's something you don't have time to do. And then again, with kind of similar to the raised beds, you're limited to what you can grow in those types of things.
Well, I think containers would be another great way to get started. If you're like me and you're feeling a little overwhelmed about all the possibilities, maybe just starting with one thing in a container, and maybe it's a flower or maybe it's tomatoes like you talked about. Just one thing and start there. And then you can move up from there if you decide you enjoy it, or if you've got children and they enjoy it, give them a little extra responsibility depending on their age, which we'll talk about in a future episode as well.
The last thing that we're going to dive into is how to get started. And this is just a basic checklist that I'm just going to kind of go over, and it really just reiterates what we've talked about so far. And again, all this information is going to be linked into our show notes. And then you can also visit your local extension office to find out some more information about it. So the first thing is selecting your site. So that is what type of garden, whether it's going to be traditional garden, the raised bed garden, container, the format on which you're wanting to grow. Test your soil if that's an option that you need. We talked about that earlier. And then preparing your ground if that's something, whether you're going to till it or you have to find soil to put in your raised bed, or finding that soil to put in your containers. And then make a plan. What are you going to what are you going to grow? What do you know, how long is it going to take if you do plant a seed for it to germinate? I'm sure you all have seen the little charts on flowers and stuff, like here's your zone and the right time to plant. So you want to check into that on what you're wanting to grow, and when you're wanting to just purchase your plants from a store or from a local farmer's market, and how to go about doing that. Think about how you're going to control your weeds. So if you're doing the traditional garden, of course that's going to take a lot more. And what are you willing and what do you want to put in to control those weeds? And then lastly, irrigation, which just means watering. What's your plan to water your plants? And that may seem simple, but if you think about it, if you have a large garden and our summers can get hot and they can get long and dry, you know, you want to have a plan, because if you're not watering them, you're not going to get the best quality products. Thank you all so much for joining us today on Life Simplified. I hope you were able to gain more insight into the different types of gardens and the resources that are available for you to help you succeed and have the best produce or flowers or whatever it is that you're planning on growing this year. But we challenge you to at least take an adventure and at least have a container garden this year. Just maybe branch out a little bit. And then, like we've mentioned over in this episode as well, we're going to be talking about so many different topics this month: the benefits of gardening, how to use your produce, how to garden with your kids or grandkids. So just a lot of different things. So we encourage you to tune back in to learn a little bit more about gardening this month. This is Life Simplified.
Thanks for listening to Life Simplified. We are family and consumer sciences agents with the University of Kentucky Cooperative Extension Service. Contact us at lifesimplifiedpodcast@gmail.com.